Welcome to round two, from setback to comeback. I'm Jaclyn, founder of Star Cycle. We help founders shut down their companies by making the difficult parts of wind up easier so you can get back to doing what you love faster. As a third-time founder, I know firsthand that the entrepreneurial journey is anything but smooth. There are highs that inspire us, but lows that challenge us are really what stick with us for longer. And round two is all about these pivotal moments with founders, innovators, visionaries who've faced these setbacks head on and found their way to a stronger, smarter comeback. And today, I'm super excited to be joined by Dave Rosen, former CEO of Wimo Games, who has an incredible story of grit and growth to share. From developing some of the world's most beloved games to then, unfortunately, having to say goodbye to some of them, he's rebuilt their vision and reinvented his approach, and now are thriving in ways that he could never have imagined. And so, without further ado, grab your coffee, put on your hoodie, and get cozy, and join me for another inspiring story of reinvention. Hi, Dave.
Hello. I knew I should have worn a hoodie for this.
It's part of the trade. Let's start with your story. Who is Dave Rosen, especially as a founder, as a CEO? Tell us a bit about your journey and how you got here.
The preamble to that is a 20-ish year career in the video game industry. So I am not, not someone who from day one, maybe in college, maybe even sooner, thought, oh, I want to be a founder. I want to start my own thing. I had a lengthy career in the video game industry with everything from Fortune 500 companies like Electronic Arts to venture-backed companies like VG Holdings to, companies that had been acquired, companies that were acquired. So before founding Wimo, I was at Kings Isle Entertainment, which is a video game company here in Austin, Texas, where I live, and that was acquired in 2021, in January of 21, by a larger German gaming group. And I had been on the leadership team there and had the opportunity. Part of our business there were PC online games, and part of our business was mobile games. And the mobile games business was new and nascent. And when we were acquired, the acquiring group wasn't as interested in mobile gaming, and particularly because it was new for us. And so Ilya Killian, who had been the founder of Kings Isle, and I talked, and we were still really passionate about what the team had been wanting to build. And that's when I took the jump into kind of full entrepreneurship and and started Wimo. With Ely. And so we started with a focus on mobile gaming. We launched a mobile game called RPG Dice Heroes of Whitestone that I'm incredibly proud of. We did that. I'll kind of later get into the, I'm sure we'll go into the what went right, what went wrong. But we made the decision after that game to pivot and focus on VR games. We built a couple of VR games, launched those, also incredibly proud of those. And then after 3 years, just about a year ago, last January, hit the point where we were at the end of our funding. We hadn't been able to raise, we weren't profitable. And so I had to make the hard decision to shut things down. And, that's what took me kind of to today and everything that I've done since.
Thank you for sharing. I know the gaming especially has seen quite a lot of ups and downs in the past few years. There's been a lot of changes in, consumer preferences for video games, how they would like to have the gaming experience from desktop to mobile and, handheld consoles to and from those things shifting quite drastically because of the pandemic, I'm sure as well. Like people's preferences just change over time. And so just wanted to take a moment to talk about that a little bit, because I think for a lot of founders, thinking about the role of, almost external market factors that are outside of your control and its impact on your ability to lead as a founder, the company's trajectory, things that help one company succeed may cause the downfall of another. And I think one of the things you mentioned was, the shift or preference for consumers towards mobile gaming was what drove you to start Wimo in the first place and depart from Kings Isle. However, some of the later market shifts also then unfortunately hurt you guys. So would love to take a moment and unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, my journey from, Kings Isle into Wimo is a really fantastic case study in the power of timing and the market. And I think this is one of the really scary things that as entrepreneurs we try not to think about is that there are things out of our control. There's a lot we can do to try and insulate ourselves, to try and be aware, but the reality is that quite frequently the difference between a stunning business success that we're going to write books about and something that may wound up winding down and, kind of forgotten is often timing. And so with King's Isle, that sale in 2021 was in part driven by during the pandemic, the gaming industry boomed. Everyone was at home. King's Island in particular, our primary game was a massively multiplayer online game called Wizard 101 that is targeted at kind of younger, not youngest kids, but call it like age 10 to 15, sort of in that range, plus or minus. Also has a lot of adult fans. But during the pandemic, those kids were out of school. They had time at home. Parents were looking for things to do. So the company really boomed, and that led to an ability to sell at a higher valuation than we would have expected.
Mm-hmm.
So then in rolling into Wimo, we made all our baseline assumptions based on the mobile market at that time and the mobile
Mm-hmm.
market as we'd seen it in the few years prior. And certainly through the pandemic, the things we didn't see coming, the biggest was were the privacy changes and the change in the mobile ad market. So privacy changes drove up advertising costs, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the success, ironically, the success during the pandemic of the big franchises meant
Mm-hmm.
those larger companies were pouring more and more and more money into marketing and driving up performance-based marketing costs. So what we found with our first mobile game was we actually overperformed on our per player metrics as far as things like revenue and retention to what we had expected, but the marketing costs were 5x. And as a
Mm-hmm.
small to mid-sized company, we just couldn't keep up with that, couldn't accelerate past that. So then we looked around, saw that VR was a newer space that was growing, and pivoted and moved into VR. That was, that's an easy sentence to say. It was a very hard thing to do. We had to let
Mm-hmm.
half our team go. We had to let projects we were working on go. We had to refocus everyone in a new space. The pivot, of course, frequently a part of the entrepreneurial journey. What we then didn't anticipate, fast forwarding kind of another 12 to 18 months, is this overall market cooling that the gaming
Mm-hmm.
industry as a whole, it's strange to talk about because the gaming industry as a whole, from a revenue and player standpoint, is growing. But from at least in 2020, late 23, 2024, from an investment and headcount standpoint, was shrinking. And so at the time when we were going out to try and raise money or try and create partnerships with, the bigger players in the industry, which historically studios that fit our profile of having built quality games, having released them on time, were able to get funding, were able to build those kind of partnership deals. We'd go to a big company and they'd say, hey, we just cut 15% of our workforce. We're not
Mm-hmm.
working externally. We'd go to a venture capitalist and they'd say, hey, we're just trying to keep the companies we invested in 3 years ago alive, the ones we
Mm-hmm.
invested in 2 years ago. So, a big part of, there's certainly plenty of things that I would think about doing differently if I were, had a time machine and were restarting Wemo. But a big piece of it is timing. And it's, you just have to be aware of that and consider that both in, what are you watching in the market? I think with mobile, we might have been able to see some of those changes coming sooner and really think about what that meant for us.
Mm-hmm.
I think with VR, it might have meant really thinking about, are we better with a smaller team taking a lot longer to build things to extend our runway versus we were of the mindset of, hey, let's get some quality things out to really have a calling card. Those are the kind of questions that um, I now am more cognizant of in the
Mm-hmm.
realm of how do you insulate yourself from the market.
Yeah, no, I fully empathize with where what you're talking about because, you know, for a lot of founders, it's almost scary or inconvenient at best and almost disempowering at worst to really think about market timing as having such a factor. It's like talking about luck, right? And a lot of folks, they want to almost hyper focus on their ability to command what they're able to do and have that full exert that full control, that thinking about external factors, to your point, market timing, headwinds and tailwinds, it's easy to ignore those as an influential factor of your success, because again, no one really wants to think about how much luck is involved. And this really heavily plays into, the self-made versus not kind of discourse that a lot of founders talk about. But I totally get it too, because for me, that was one of the tougher pills to swallow was, the tailwinds that initially created my previous venture and drove us to success very, very soon became headwinds that ended up, letting us crash and burn. Right. So I fully understand where you're coming from. It's not easy to talk about. And so I really appreciate you sharing that, Dave. And wanted to follow up a little bit on what you said towards the end there is, of course, if we had a time machine, we would do things a little bit differently, right? And think about these different setbacks and how you would have done them differently. How are you defining success for this next phase as you look forward? And what are some of the lessons that you think you're bringing with you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, first, I think what you said about kind of a desire or maybe almost a fear at times of acknowledging the element of luck, and the
Mm-hmm.
element of timing is so true. And if anything, my experience has been we tend to focus on outliers and
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, look, but this company or this person did it even when it was a bad time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this was part of what led to you and I meeting in the first place, was kind of my recognition when I was having to wind down the company of no one is talking about what goes into winding down a company. And I think it's the same thing where the story is going to be written about the one company, the one founder that made it work in the face of incredible headwinds, and not about the 10 or 100 or 1,000 that, despite great work, those headwinds took them down.
Yeah.
And that's just emotionally hard. I mean, I think it
Mm-hmm.
makes it hard because you have these examples you're looking at, and there's a sense of wrongness, right? You look at it and you
Mm-hmm.
say, well, this company that did what I did, 3 years ago, they became a huge success. How come, why did that happen for them and not for me? And it can
Mm-hmm.
really, lead to some self-doubt.
And I think we talk about this a lot, but and we should definitely unpack this a little bit as well. But the shame spiral, you beat yourself up. You're like, why was this other person able to do it and not me? And it's so, again, easy to focus on the highlight reels of what other people are saying. And as you say, focus on the outliers, but while forgetting that there are just so many things that happen that cause success, that cause failure, and prescribe certain things to certain outcomes, even though you might not have seen all the other parts that happen. So I totally understand where you're coming from. But yeah, coming back to what's coming up next for you, um,
Yeah.
tell us about it.
Yeah. I think there's so many things I took away, and a lot of them I think are kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, conditional learnings, where it's sort of like, oh, if
Mm-hmm.
I saw something like this in the future, here's a question I would ask. So one, that awareness of the market, really watch the market, really being careful about what are the comparables, what are the comparisons you're making. Um, Obviously when you're out pitching for funding, you want to paint the rosiest picture you can. That's the nature of that part of the game. But for yourself, for your team, as you work with them, for your investors, once you're embedded with them, really being clear on what are our what are our market assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
what do we believe is happening, and revisiting those regularly to say, is that still the case?
Mm-hmm.
And then I think coming off of that, right, as soon as you see
Yeah.
something that isn't matching up, being, you know, kind of fearless, shameless, and fast at being ready to adjust and do
Mm-hmm.
something different. And um, you know, that also I think leads to really being cognizant of your runway, your timeline, your
Mm-hmm.
investor expectations. Um, I think that's one of the challenges is how do you find that balance with your investors or your key partners
Mm-hmm.
of open, honest communication such that you're all maintaining enthusiasm for the idea, but also being honest with one another if there's something that's creating a challenge to figure out, is this something we just grit through, or
Mhm.
is this something we really need to think about a pivot? So for
Mhm.
me right now, I'm really trying to look at, one, only engaging with things that I'm going to be excited about working on for a long time. Because I think, if I were to do something different with Wemo, one of my learnings was I would have probably used a smaller team for longer.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
just giving yourself time to see what's happening, time to adjust. It can be counterintuitive because there are moments when it's, hey, this is an idea that we got to get this idea to market first. So, you have to find that balance. But um, part of that for me is having that mindset of, this next thing, I don't know if it's going to be 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, or maybe more. So
Mhm.
really make sure that is something I'm passionate about, not just for a day, not just for a month, not just for a year, but that I'm
Mhm.
going to be excited to work on for longer than I might have assumed. Um, People is critical,
Mhm.
really just wanting to work with people that I'm excited to work with, because I think when you've gone through that cycle of it going wrong, that's one of the things
Mhm.
I'm very grateful for with Wemo. Everyone from, you know, our team, my leadership team, um, through to, investors, or,
Mhm.
which in our case was really largely a singular investor.
Mhm.
Everyone was aligned. Everyone understood where we were. Um, Everyone believed in our plan.
Mhm.
And, we were honest and transparent to the degree that we could be, um, about the situation and what we were doing and why we were doing it. And so there's never, to this day, there's no finger pointing. There's no, I didn't see this coming. Um, None of that, because everyone was on the same page. And so that's one of the things I'm
Mhm.
really clear on is I don't want to work with investors, or certainly at sort of an executive leadership co-founder kind of level, with anyone who isn't operating with that same level of kind of intellectual honesty, transparency, and understanding that, we're taking a risk. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the big things. And that was a conversation that Ely and I had from the beginning, because he was our primary investor. Of, the goal was to do something big and to try and do something big. And if that doesn't succeed, to accept that we might fail,
Mhm.
because there were opportunities along the way to think about, are there things that we could do that would sort of just allow the company to persist, but would move the bigger vision farther out. And we
Mhm.
made a conscious decision to keep moving towards the bigger vision, rather than, kind of just maintain existence,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
which is hard, especially, the human side.
Yeah.
I still worry. I still keep track of every former Wemo employee. Most of
Mhm.
them, have found awesome new roles. The ones who
That's great.
haven't,
Yeah.
um, I worry about it, and I, continue to look for ways I can support and help them.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah,
My
and then,
my goodness, yeah, I resonate with that last part so deeply because that was by far the hardest thing about shutting down last time around was, saying looking people in the eye. It was mostly virtually in the eye, unfortunately, because we were all remote. It was during or towards the tail end of lockdown. And effectively saying you could have been anywhere and you place your trust in us, in me, and we couldn't make it work, and I'm sorry. And that was 100% the hardest thing to do. And to this date I'm very grateful that I hope we also maintained great relationships, sometimes even friendships with the folks that we used to work with. And there's a lot of mutual love, mutual respect, and that's genuinely, that outcome is more than I could have asked for. So like I just want to take a second to acknowledge that. And you brought up quite a few things, so just gonna rattle them off. But the first is, you know, looking at pivoting. And I know you mentioned like, oh, saying that we pivoted from mobile to VR is easy to say, but it was, of course, a very difficult reality. And it's definitely one of those things where it makes a catchy little saying like, oh, just pivot and pivot fast, move fast, break things kind of thing. But there's so much collateral damage almost emotionally, operationally that comes with that. And a lot of the times it can be difficult to figure out when to do it, right? And the same kind of almost stubbornness, the blinders on approach that most founders take that make us good founders and good CEOs can sometimes work against us when these decisions need to be made. And I love that, and this kind of ties in nicely to what I want to talk about next is I love that you had such an open line of communication, like with your investors, with your team, and talking about this, what's at stake, that there is a possibility of failure and not being afraid to have those conversations. And I know that this is something that you talked about with Forbes as well, in some of the pieces that you've written for them, is the importance of communication, the importance of empathetic communication, especially during hard times, and especially when you feel like, you would rather eat glass than tell someone that you think you're going to fail.
Yeah, I think that's a great description, that you'd rather eat glass, because it is, um, I mean, I would go into every time I would speak to our investors,
Mm-hmm.
and there's that part of me that's just waiting for, this is the call where they fly off the handle and tell me what a
Mm-hmm.
terrible job I'm done, and how could you have done this, and what's wrong with you, and you know, and that never happened, right? I mean, that's, similarly in having to speak to, all the way to the point of telling people we're shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's this fear that when you tell people that, um, they're going to lose it, they're going to be angry at you, they're going to, it
Disappointed.
was,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what brought me to tears at the point when we announced the shutdown was how many employees, people I had just told, you don't have a job anymore, reached out to say, to ask how I was doing, to
Mm-hmm.
say, that, gosh, this seems like it must be really hard for you to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, my experience throughout my career, that's one of the realities of the gaming industry, because it's so project based, is even if you're inside a major multinational corporation, um, projects are getting spun up and shut down all the time. It's really hard, at times, and very sad, but it means, for better or worse, I've been through that many times in my career on both
Mm-hmm.
sides of that metaphorical table.
Mm-hmm.
And I am always amazed by kind of the dignity, um, and the professionalism with which people operate. And so, I think that's one of those learnings for me that is important in removing fear, because I think the fear of those conversations being hard, being just unpleasant or unproductive, causes people to not communicate. You
Yeah.
don't want to call up your investor and say, hey, I'm really worried about, this trend I'm seeing. You don't want to call
Mm-hmm.
on your leadership team and say, hey, our fundraising is behind schedule, and,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure out what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think my big takeaway is sooner is better. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's a balance, particularly, as you go from that leadership level to the rest of the team, if you want people to, be able to keep working, to not be in fear. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's, it is, I think, really important to just trust that if you are honest with people and explain, even, when we shifted from mobile to VR,
Mm-hmm.
and that involved, letting people go,
Mm-hmm.
explaining what our strategy was, explaining why we were making that choice, explaining what I thought would be hard about it, what I thought would be exciting for people about it, giving them an opportunity to talk and to listen, kind of really being on receive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's the important thing, um, is that to have that kind of relationship and to be able to be in a place where you can have those hard conversations, that can't wait until the last day. that
Absolutely. Yeah.
that is about, and when things are going well, you need to be able to do that
Mm-hmm.
too, right? You need people to
Yeah.
be able to tell you ideas. You need people to be able to tell you problems, but
Mm-hmm.
you can't wait until that last moment. You have to establish a culture, and it starts with
Mm-hmm.
you, of having open conversations and being, at times, a little vulnerable and a little uncomfortable, and maybe
Yeah.
sharing more than you want to share. Um,
Yeah.
but that's how
And
you build that trust.
I love that you mentioned that, because a lot of people talk about building that culture internally for the team, right? Like, oh, you don't want to be surrounded by people who only nod and say yes and don't challenge you. But I think one lesser aspect and perhaps more difficult aspect is to try and cultivate those same types of relationships, that type of space with investors, with stakeholders, with people who are supporting you from the other side, because most of the time, certainly not all the time, but most of the time people want to help. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, right? But it is one of those things where, if you give people the space, the time, the grace to yourself, to those folks to have those difficult conversations, it could very well just end up being that lifeline that you didn't realize you had. And it's certainly one of personally my biggest regrets last time around was not leaving enough time at the end, because if you think about it, right, as you mentioned, you don't know what the next thing is going to be 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years. And what's a week? What's 2 weeks to create that space? Because worst case, you end up where you would have been if you hadn't given it that little bit of space. But if best case scenario, that could really just turn things around for you. And I think that's a big lesson that is hard for a lot of founders to learn. But unfortunately or fortunately, you and I have gone through the experience on the other side, and we're like, yeah, time is probably the biggest gift you can give yourself. And I love that, you know, I don't love how we came to learn this, but I love that we have both learned it and are able to bring it forward to what's happening next. And so, as we slowly wrap up, one of the things I wanted to also take a moment to chat about is, you've kind of, to your point, right? You've been in giant multi probably international corporations like EA, building with teams around the world from different cultures, all of those types of things, all the way to running your own company and being able to define success and, of course, correspondingly failures on almost each and every level. How has the definition of failure changed for you over this time? And we talked about what the success looked like for you, but perhaps how would you redefine failure for yourself going forward?
Yeah, for me, I think it's funny because I've struggled with that word failure, right? It's
Mm,
such a loaded term. And so
yeah.
you fall into this euphemism of, it wound down, things didn't wrap up the way we wanted.
I
Um,
stepped away. I said
yeah,
goodbye. Like, yeah.
yeah. And I've kind of come back around to just embracing the word failure. And I think
Hmm.
the big thing that has changed in the definition for me is, um, it's impermanence. So
Hmm.
failure is very easy to feel in the midst of a failure. I kind of liken it to when you have the flu. And when you have the flu and you have no energy and your whole body hurts,
Hmm.
and you just have this little voice in your head that says, you're going to feel this way forever. You're never going to
Hmm.
feel good again. And that's really
Hmm.
what this kind of failure is, right? You go through those
Hmm.
dark moments of feeling like, this was my chance. It failed. I'm never going to succeed at anything again. If I couldn't do this, what's wrong with me? And
Hmm.
recognizing, failure is just a moment. And, all the cliches apply, that it's not a failure if you learn something. I look at Wimo as 3 years working with people I was grateful to get to work with, building stuff I'm really
Hmm.
proud of, where I learned a tremendous amount. There's no part of me that thinks back to that time machine I don't have, oh, if I could, go back 3 years, I would have not done that.
Hmm.
I'm grateful for it. And I think that's a big part of redefining failure for me has been recognizing that it's temporal, it's of the moment, and
Hmm.
that it's that idea, that business at that time and place failed. Not
Hmm.
I am a failure, not the people on
Hmm.
our team are a failure. And as we talked about with, kind of market dynamics, that team, that idea at a different time and place, you know, that there might be still something there, right? So just recognizing everything that goes into it, and that failure is a very small, pithy word, but there's always a
Mhm.
whole lot that is underneath it, that is unique and different in each situation, and recognizing that. I'm
Yeah,
interested to hear
failure.
kind of
Yeah.
your perspective on, you know, how you are framing it for yourself these days.
My God. Yeah. Failure is temporal. I might actually get that tattooed on me because that really just encapsulates it so beautifully. I love how you phrase that. And so, yeah, I heavily resonate with that in the sense of like failure is, it doesn't have to define you, right? You you should learn from your failures and take the time to digest it. As easy as it is to beat yourself up, there should be some level of, and that's what I tried to do for myself as well, was like really genuinely sit down with those feelings, with the grievances, whether valid or not, and run through them and really ask yourself, is there something I could have done differently in a constructive way, not in like a I'm going to beat myself to death kind of way, right? And I know you and I have both done that together over many different conversations, and I'm grateful honestly to have you as like a sounding board and friend in that regard. And that's another thing that I have learned as well, is like you really need that village around you when you are going through those things. It's so easy to withdraw from your friends because it's difficult to tell them what happened. It's so easy to, bury yourself in other things and kind of push that grief aside, because let's face it, it is grief, it is real, and we should process it, we should face it. Most important thing is really to keep going and take the time, however long it takes to keep going, to get back on your feet. But the most important thing is to get back on your feet, because we we need you, right? And we, as in founders, your friends, if we're going to be a little hokey about it, the world kind of needs you, right? And so I think it's so easy to lose sight of that when you're staring at something that you poured your whole life and soul into and think, I failed and this will define me forever, when it doesn't have to. And you have to give yourself the time, the grace, and the space to feel those things. So thank you. Thank you so much, Dave, for being so open and so vulnerable. It's a hard conversation to have. I think failure is scary for so many folks, including myself. But I think, everyone has a lot to learn from you in giving themselves the room to think through these things, and especially how to have these hard conversations with yourself and with other folks, because you can't have people in your corner if they don't know where to go. So thank you so much for sharing. So on that note, where can people find you? Where can people rally around you? What's the easiest way to get in touch if they have a question for you, or if they have something they want to share?
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for, I mean, first and foremost, thank you for reaching out. You were one of the first people when I wrote on Forbes about this experience of, having to wind down a company and feeling like there's no one out there to talk to about it. You were one of the first people, that was someone I didn't already know, that reached
Mm,
out, and it just absolutely meant the world, and really took it from beyond a place of, well, of course these people are telling me it's okay, they're friends of mine, they love me, to,
mm,
okay, even there are just other people who have been through this. This is real. There's nothing wrong with me. So thank
mm.
you for that gift. Um, and
That's
for
very
having me,
kind. Thank you.
and for having me on your podcast, and all the time we've spent talking. It's been wonderful. Best place to find me is LinkedIn. You
Mhm.
can reach out to me there. Shoot me a message. I share stuff when I can, but that's usually the easiest place to find me.
Yeah, and follow along Dave's column on Forbes if you're not, because there's a lot of really great actionable tips, that emotional or operational. I'm sure if you are unfortunately looking at a difficult decision, I'm sure Dave's words of wisdom that were hard earned and hard learned will resonate with you. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.